Hello learners, welcome again to our session today. It is a continuation of what we started earlier on. Recall in our previous class we had introduced the concept to do with the Maximax decision rule. Remember we said we'll be talking of 5. Maximax decision rule, Maximin decision rule, Minimax decision rule, High-Wiz decision rule, and Laplace decision rule. In our last class, we had introduced Maximax decision rule. I gave you the basis, all the concepts that you need to know for aspect of our decision making under uncertainty. So in our today's class, I'll want us to handle the second part, which is Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. That is what I want us to handle in our session today. Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. So we are having Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. That is what we are handling today. Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. So, looking at Maximin decision rule, my good students, will find that also is a very simple concept, so long as you've mastered the original concept that we gave when we started. So, Maximin decision rule, at this point, I'll be looking at this decision maker. This decision maker is very conservative. He assumes that the worst will happen. I'm having a decision maker, you are an investor, and at this point, you're assuming that the worst will happen. So, what you're going to do, you're going to select the minimum alternatives, or rather you're going to select the alternatives that will give you the minimum returns first of all. Then these alternatives are going to give you the minimum returns. You are going to select the best of the minimums that you have selected. So that's why you're talking about being a conservative method, or rather an investor who is a very pessimistic. An investor is very pessimistic. He assumes that the worst will happen. So in simple terms, under Maximin method, my good students, you are saying that this criteria is based on the conservative approach to assume that the worst possible is going to happen. So at this point, you are saying the decision maker considers each strategy and locates the minimum payoff for each, and then select that alternative which maximizes the minimum payoff. And as Mwalimu has mentioned, this method is usually used by a decision maker who is risk averse. Remember the risk attitude that we had talked about earlier on? So at this point, it's going to be used by an investor who is risk averse, and that's why we are talking about Maximin, maximum of the minimums. The decision maker will first of all identify the minimum returns that he can make under each decision alternatives. Then from the minimum return that he has identified, he is going now to select the maximum of these minimums that we've identified. So in that case, the same illustration that we used in our previous class, the same illustration that we're going to use. So remember, in our last class, we started from scratch to the point that we arrived at our payoff table. So now it will be simple, because what Mwalimu is going to do, I'm just going to take this table of ours at 20, at 40, or rather you can just use it the way it is there. Instead of us doing all this again, we can just use a table that here, this is our table, but what we are going to focus on is Maximin. So that should take us to the steps. Let me give you the steps first of all, so that it should be very simple for us. So steps in working it out. Steps in solving Maximin decision rule problems. Step number 1, what you need to identify is, first of all, to prepare the payoff table. Prepare the payoff table. That should be your step number 1. Prepare the payoff table. Step number 2, what you need to do in step number 2, after you've prepared your payoff table is to identify the minimums payoff, identify the minimum payoff under each decision alternatives. Identify the minimum payoffs under each decision alternative. Identify the under each decision alternative. Identify. We're saying that you need to identify the minimum payoffs under each decision alternatives. Then step number 3, from the minimums identified in step 2, from the minimums identified in step 2, select the decision alternative. Select the decision alternative with the best of the minimums. Select the decision alternative with the best of the minimums. So these are our steps that we are going to use in solving Maximin decision rules problems. So first of all, we've said that you need to prepare the payoff table. And there is our payoff table. Identify the minimum payoff under each decision alternatives. If possible, underline this word, under each decision alternative. If possible, kindly underline the word under each decision alternative. If possible, underline that word, and you're going to see the reason why Mwalimu is saying you should underline that word as we continue. Now, this is what you are going to do. Already, we have prepared our payoff table, right? So from our payoff table, we need to take the minimums. We need to identify the minimums, returns under each decision alternatives. Minimum return. Minimum return at this point at 20, minimum I can clearly see I'm having 25,000. At 40, minimum I can see I'm having 575,000. At 55, minimum I can see I'm having 740,000. We've identified the minimums. That is step number 2. Step number 3, from the minimums identified, we should select the decision alternative with the best of the minimums. So again, the question will be, from these minimums that we've identified, which one is the best amongst all of them? The best of the minimums here, or the maximum of the minimums that we've identified, we can clearly see is how much? 740. We can clearly see is 740. 740 is the best of the minimums that we have identified. It is the best of the minimums that we have identified. So therefore, if we were to advise the company, because that's the question that was asked, advise the company on the best decision alternative to adopt. So this is the best of the minimums. This is the best of the minimums. So therefore, the company should adopt a selling price of 55 shillings. The company should adopt a selling price of 55 shillings because that is where we are realizing the best of the minimums. That is where we do have the best of the minimum. So therefore, at this point, the company should adopt a selling price of 55. The company should adopt a selling price of 55 shillings. So my good students will find that that is what you're talking about, what? Maximin decision rule. Maximin decision rule. That is how we are going to look at it. That's how we are going to look at it. Now, in our next class, I'll want us to handle the second, or rather the third method actually. And this is the most interesting method that, again, you must always tend to have at the back of your mind. This method that we're going to handle in our next class, it is known as what? Minimax decision rule. Minimax decision rule is a concept that we're going to handle in our next class. To that point, thank you so much, and let us meet in the next class. Thank you.